Backstage, everyone was congratulating Jimmy Page. He thought he'd won that night. Then Hendrix walked quietly onto the stage and nothing was ever the same. London. Spring 1967. The Speakeasy Club on Margaret Street. A small venue, maybe 200 people pressed into a space meant for half that. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like fog. The stage was barely raised, just a wooden platform with a few amplifiers and microphones that crackled with feedback between songs. It was a musician's club. The kind of place where legends came to watch each other, to measure themselves against their peers, to prove something that couldn't be proven anywhere else. Tonight, Jimmy Page was proving something. He'd been playing for 40 minutes. The Yardbirds had dissolved, and he was testing new material, new techniques, pushing his guitar into territories no one had explored before. His fingers moved across the fretboard with supernatural precision. Bends that seemed to defy physics, harmonics that rang out like crystal, distortion that felt controlled and wild at the same time. The crowd was transfixed. Other musicians stood with their arms crossed, nodding slowly, recognizing mastery when they heard it. Page was transcendent tonight, playing like a man possessed, like someone who had touched something beyond technique and entered pure expression. When he finished his final song, a blues that had mutated into something entirely new, something that didn't have a name yet, the room erupted. Not polite applause. Real appreciation. The kind of response that musicians give when they've witnessed something that changes the landscape. Page unplugged his guitar, smiled slightly, and walked off stage toward the narrow backstage area. People reached out to touch his shoulder as he passed. Incredible, Jimmy. Never heard anything like it. You've outdone yourself. He believed them. Why wouldn't he? He just delivered the performance of his life. In the cramped backstage hallway, barely wide enough for two people to pass, Page leaned against the brick wall, still holding his guitar by the neck, breathing hard, letting the adrenaline settle. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His fingers were still vibrating from the strings. Eric Clapton appeared beside him, shaking his head with a half-smile. That was something else, Jimmy. Page nodded, too exhausted to be modest. Felt good. Felt right. You've raised the bar tonight, Clapton said. I don't know how anyone follows that. And that's when the room changed. Not dramatically. Not with announcement or fanfare. Just a subtle shift in the atmosphere, the way air pressure changes before a storm. Someone had walked into the hallway. Page couldn't see who yet, too many people crowded in the narrow space, but he felt it. The way conversations quieted slightly. The way people's attention turned. Then the crowd parted. Jimi Hendrix stood at the end of the hallway, backlit by the dim stage lights behind him. He wasn't holding a guitar. His hands hung relaxed at his sides. He wore one of his elaborate jackets, purple with gold threading, the kind of thing that would look ridiculous on anyone else but somehow looked inevitable on him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. His face was simply still, calm, like the surface of deep water. Page straightened slightly against the wall, unconsciously gripping his guitar tighter. Hendrix walked forward slowly, and people moved aside without being asked, creating a path through the narrow hallway. He stopped about 4 feet from Page. Close enough to speak quietly. Far enough to not be confrontational. For 3 seconds neither man spoke. They just looked at each other. Two guitarists. Two different worlds. Two approaches to the same impossible art. That was beautiful playing, Hendrix said finally. His voice was soft, almost gentle. Really beautiful. Page felt something strange in his chest. Not quite relief. Not quite unease. Something else. Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it. Hendrix tilted his head slightly, still holding Page's gaze. You play like you're trying to prove something. The hallway went completely silent. Eric Clapton took a small step back. Everyone sensed the shift. This wasn't a compliment anymore, but it wasn't an insult either. It was something more dangerous, observation. Page's jaw tightened. I play the way I play. I know, Hendrix said, still in that same calm voice. And it's amazing. Every note perfect. Every bend exactly where it should be. Like you've mapped out the entire territory and claimed it. Is there something wrong with that? Page asked, hearing the defensive edge in his own voice and hating it. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Nothing wrong with it, Hendrix said. But I wonder, when you're playing, who are you talking to? The audience? The other musicians in the room? Yourself? Page didn't answer. His fingers had gone white around his guitar neck. Because when I play, Hendrix continued, still in that quiet, devastating tone, I'm not trying to prove I can. I'm trying to find out if I should. There's a difference. Someone in the hallway coughed. A door opened and closed somewhere. The sounds felt miles away. I'm going to play now, Hendrix said, and it wasn't a challenge. It was just information, delivered in the same tone someone might use to mention the weather. You should stay. Listen if you want. He turned and walked back toward the stage, that same unhurried pace, hands still empty, not looking back. Page stood against the brick wall, his triumph from 10 minutes ago evaporating like smoke. Eric Clapton was looking at him with something like sympathy. You going to watch? Clapton asked quietly. Page wanted to leave. Wanted to walk out of the club, get in his car, drive home, forget this conversation ever happened. But his feet wouldn't move. Something deeper than ego or pride kept him rooted. Yeah, he heard himself say. I'm going to watch. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. The stage at the Speakeasy was small, barely 10 feet across. Hendrix stepped onto it without announcement, without introduction. Someone handed him a guitar, a white Stratocaster, already plugged in, already humming with potential. The room had filled again. Word had spread somehow in the 15 minutes since Page's set ended. Jimi Hendrix was about to play. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Page stood at the back of the room, still holding his own guitar, watching. Hendrix didn't adjust the amplifier settings. Didn't test the sound. Didn't warm up. He just stood there for a moment, eyes closed, the guitar hanging from his shoulder strap, his right hand resting gently on the strings without pressing them. The room waited. And then Hendrix played a single note. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just one note, bent slowly, held for what felt like forever, released with such control that it seemed to dissolve rather than end. Page felt his chest tighten. That one note contained something Page's entire 40-minute performance hadn't touched. It wasn't about technique. It wasn't about speed or precision or innovation. It was about truth. Raw, unfiltered, almost painful truth. Hendrix opened his eyes and began to play. Not a song. Not a structure. Just sound, emerging and evolving, following some internal logic that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. His fingers barely seemed to move, yet the guitar sang with voices, human voices, crying voices, laughing voices, voices that spoke in languages that had no words. The technique was there, Page could hear it, could recognize the mastery, but it was invisible, secondary. What came through was pure feeling, unfiltered emotion channeled through wood and wire and electricity. Page watched Hendrix's face. His eyes were closed again. His body swayed slightly, responding to the music rather than creating it. He looked like he was listening to something coming through him rather than from him. 3 minutes in, Hendrix did something Page had never seen before. He played a phrase, beautiful, complex, perfect, and then deliberately broke it. Let it fall apart. Let the notes scatter into chaos. And then, with impossible gentleness, gathered them back together into something even more beautiful. He wasn't trying to show control. He was demonstrating surrender. Page felt something crack inside his chest. Not his ego, exactly. Something deeper. The foundation he'd built his entire approach on. The belief that mastery meant dominion, that greatness meant conquering the instrument. Hendrix was showing him something else entirely. That the greatest players don't conquer their instrument. They serve it. They listen to it. They let it speak through them. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. After 8 minutes, though it felt like 8 seconds and 8 hours simultaneously, Hendrix let the final note fade into silence. He didn't look at the crowd. Didn't acknowledge the stunned quiet that had replaced the usual speakeasy chatter. He simply unplugged the guitar, handed it back to whoever had given it to him, and stepped off the stage. No bow. No smile. No acknowledgement that anything significant had happened. The room stayed silent for another 3 seconds. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then it became an ovation, but a strange one, hushed, almost reverent, like applause in a cathedral. Hendrix walked through the crowd toward the backstage area. Toward where Page was standing. Page couldn't move. Couldn't speak. His earlier confidence had been completely dismantled, not by aggression or competition, but by witnessing something that existed in a different dimension entirely. Hendrix stopped in front of him again. That same calm expression. That same gentle presence. "You play beautifully," Hendrix said again. And this time Page heard what he hadn't heard before. It wasn't a compliment laced with criticism. It was genuine. "Really beautiful. You've got more technique in your little finger than most people have in their entire body." "But," Page managed to say, his voice hoarse. Hendrix smiled slightly for the first time that night. "No but. That's the whole sentence. You play beautifully. That's enough. You don't need to prove it's enough. The moment you stop trying to prove it, you might find something even better." He reached out and gently tapped the body of Page's guitar, still hanging from Page's shoulder, with one finger. A soft, hollow sound. "The instrument already knows everything," Hendrix said. "We're just learning to get out of its way." And then he walked past, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Page standing alone with his guitar and a worldview that had been quietly, irrevocably shattered. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Page didn't play for 3 days after that night. He sat in his flat with his guitar, picking up and putting it down repeatedly, unable to approach it the same way. Every time his fingers found the fretboard, he heard Hendrix's words. "You play like you're trying to prove something." And he realized it was true. Every note he'd ever played had been a small argument, a tiny proof of concept, a demonstration of mastery. He'd been so focused on showing what he could do that he'd forgotten to listen to what the music wanted to be. On the 4th day, he picked up the guitar again. But this time, instead of playing something he knew, something that would showcase his technique, he closed his eyes and played a single note. He held it. Bent it slightly. Let it breathe. Let it be enough. And in that moment, Jimmy Page began to hear what Jimi Hendrix had been trying to show him. That the space between the notes matters as much as the notes themselves. That silence is part of the music. That surrendering control is its own form of mastery. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Years later, after Hendrix died, after Led Zeppelin had conquered the world, after Page himself had become one of the most influential guitarists in history, someone asked him about that night at the Speakeasy. "What did Hendrix teach you?" Page was quiet for a long time before answering. "He didn't teach me anything," Page finally said. "Teaching is about transferring knowledge. What Jimmy did was harder than teaching. He showed me what I already knew but was afraid to trust. That music isn't about winning. It's about listening. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is play one perfect note and let it be enough." The interviewer pressed. "But you went on to create such complex, layered music. How does that fit with simplicity?" "You're missing the point," Page said gently. "Complexity and simplicity aren't opposites. They're both about the same thing, honesty. Jimmy could play the most technically insane runs you've ever heard, but he only played them when the music asked for it. The rest of the time, he had the courage to be quiet. That's what I learned. Not how to play guitar. How to listen." The white Stratocaster that Hendrix played that night at the Speakeasy eventually made its way into a private collection. But the real legacy of that evening wasn't the instrument. It was the dozens of musicians who were in that room, who witnessed what happened, and who spent the rest of their careers trying to capture even a fraction of what Hendrix had demonstrated. Not domination. Not conquest. Surrender. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Jimmy Page went on to write Stairway to Heaven 3 years later. And if you listen closely to that 8-minute masterpiece, you can hear the influence of that night at the Speakeasy. You can hear the moment he stopped trying to prove he could play guitar and started letting the guitar speak through him. You can hear the space between the notes. You can hear Jimi Hendrix's gentle voice saying, "The instrument already knows everything. We're just learning to get out of its way." And Jimmy Page, finally, had learned to listen.